Go watch John Oliver's whole segment in its entirety. Please take into account the context, and you will see that he undeniably contradicts himself and is advocating for a system that he admits could cost more, and he admits will remove more choice. You know, I want to ask you, before we move on to this rebuttal here with John Oliver, how many Americans who support socialized or universal health care do you encounter in your day-to-day life, in the real world, not on Twitter, who are actually familiar with how these healthcare systems work and the real-world results seen abroad? I want to know how many people you encounter who actually have that information as opposed to the sort of the fairy tale version that John Oliver and others try to sell them, which we will get to. So let's set this up. We've addressed some of these arguments before, so I don't want to retread all of our socialized healthcare territory. You can just type in Steven Crowder healthcare if the search results worked, but they don't, so they're dead forever. So you never get to see them again. You will never find
Seth
them.
Myers is what you'll find.
Seth Myers
to exist.
All the way down.
But there are some arguments that John Oliver sort of focuses on that I think we could do a better job of addressing, because a lot of people, they buy that shit. So let's go to John Oliver. First clip.
Medicare for all. I lived in England, Sean. Nationalized healthcare is a disaster. When rich, famous people get sick, they don't fly to Canada, they don't fly to Cuba, they come here because we have the best medicine in the world.
Look, I will give that man this. America does have one of the best healthcare systems in the world for rich, famous people. Unfortunately, too many people are born in this country with a terrible pre-existing condition called not being Beyonce.
I think that's funny. Actually, it's funny. Unlike Seth Myers, who keeps auto-playing. John Oliver, you can auto-play. It's funny.
Yeah, he's funny.
And informative, if only sort of misinformative, if that's a word. So let's lay this out really quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on this. We already have Medicaid for the poor.
We do.
And as we will get to, nationalizing healthcare just makes it worse for everyone. Furthermore, in countries with socialized healthcare, there's inevitably an underground market where only the super wealthy can afford what is equivalent to what we know as privatized care here in the United States. For example, my mother in Quebec, at this point before Shawi versus Quebec was a Supreme Court case, you couldn't get any privatized healthcare. She needed an MRI. It was 12 months, I believe, or 14 months.
Yeah.
A little bit of cash, greased the palms with $900. She got an MRI within 6. That's an improvement.
That's definitely
still crappy by American standards, though. So in all of these other socialized healthcare countries, you end up with more of a two-tiered system where only the super wealthy can afford it because they're not under crippling taxes. Let's go to the next clip, and then I want to come back with you.
The majority of people who file for bankruptcy cite medical expenses as a factor, and you probably already knew that deep down from just how often you see GoFundMe campaigns online.
No, wrong. But first, you had something you wanted to say.
Wrong. I was going to say the previous guy, he wasn't rebutting the point that it's expensive sometimes to get great medical health. He was just basically saying everybody that says the U.S. has a really bad system is wrong because of this. Right. And so I think John Oliver is just taking that.
As far as this, the medical bankruptcies, it is wrong. No, Your Honor, the defense is wrong. It uses a methodology that inflates the numbers. How? These studies just confirm that people who went bankrupt also claimed that they had medical expenses. In other words, they had many expenses. If any of those expenses listed were medical expenses, John Oliver and the like, or people at the TYT network, will claim that the majority or a huge portion of bankruptcies come from exclusively or primarily medical expenses. Review, if you actually look at the data, the number is somewhere between 12 and 17%. Okay? And by the way, this doesn't even mean that medical expenses were actually the problem. If you go bankrupt because you have no job, or you have no insurance and you can't pay your medical bills. Is that a medical bill problem, or is it an unemployment problem? And I think this is, cut off the head of the dragon. If we look at bankruptcies as a whole, this is important because I think John Oliver is someone who, in good faith, is trying to find the right solutions. I just think that he's wrong. I think this is a compassionate segment. But if we look at bankruptcies, and I agree, I think we should be compassionate. I think bankruptcies are a problem. We should do what we can within the bounds of the legitimate purview of government to try and reduce them. It doesn't mean that you take money out of my back pocket and basically light it ablaze, which is effectively what the federal government does. But I think if we can create a safety net that doesn't infringe on individual rights, if we can be great, sure. So let's look at bankruptcies, because that's the root cause of this problem here. They had a huge spike. Up to about, I think we have 60,000 a year in 2010 under the Obama administration. Then they dropped. They've stayed low consistently under President Trump. Compare that, by the way, to the yearly unemployment rate. It's almost identical, these graphs. Same spike in 2010.
Wow.
So what does all of this mean? What does all this mean? What does all this mean?
I could have sworn you were going to go.
I figured I would go Cockney or Manchester. What does all this mean? Yeah, it means you can't pick a pocket Why would you pick a pocket? It's just a stereotype I'm perpetuating, yeah?
Oh, jeez.
Extra, read all about it. So, the medical expenses, they're not the driving force behind bankruptcy. If you don't have a job, any big expense is going to cause bankruptcy. And so, as a conservative, I want to create an atmosphere, go with the free enterprise system that brought us here, that allows us to have the lowest unemployment, highest job participation, and most legitimate wage growth of any other system throughout the globe or human history ever. Next clip.
We would be getting a lot for that money. Remember, 27 million more people would be covered, and they'd be covered well. Bernie's plan is incredibly generous. It covers vision, dental, long-term care, and drugs. In fact, Medicare for All is a misleading title because Medicare requires some co-pays and out-of-pocket expenses, and Bernie will excitedly tell you his plan eliminates those.
Under the Medicare for All bill that I wrote, premiums are gone. Co-payments are gone. Deductibles are gone. All out-of-pocket expenses are gone.
Oh, so we're just promising shit we can't deliver. Okay, free pipes.
You got yours, right?
Everybody. By the way, I'm going to have to fix that prop there afterward, Garrett. He can say it. This is disingenuous. How do I know? Ask me how I know. I was raised in a country where we had it. And I know there's a difference between socialized healthcare, universal healthcare. We're going to use the terms somewhat interchangeably because that's kind of what they're advocating here.
Yeah.
All countries, if you know some exceptions, let me know. With universal coverage systems, they mandate some kind of co-payments for outpatient pharmaceuticals. There's cost sharing for inpatient hospital stays. Out-of-pocket costs, okay, they can range from, I think it was 15% for health costs for Canadians, where I was from, to 28% for people in Switzerland, all the way up to 61% for health expenditures in Singapore. By the way, they can also bend you over in front of your wife and spank your ass with a cane because you spat gum on the sidewalk. So there's a give and take.
Yeah.
It's a benevolent dictatorship, but an embarrassing one.
But look, I don't have to step in gum, and I appreciate that.
But if you outlaw Hubba Bubba, then only Hubba Bubba dealers will have them.
Oh, that's right.
That's a problem.
You've created a black market for gum.
Bubblicious notwithstanding. That's a whole different brood. It's like
Big
the
League
Latin
Chew.
Kings
Big
and
League Chew. Come on.
the Crips. Okay, let's go to the next clip where he talks about how much it would cost and how it would be worth it. This is another common argument.
You can't definitely say that it would be more expensive, but even if it was, I personally would argue that it's worth it. And either way, cost is a lot more complicated an issue than just going on TV and saying $32.6 trillion like Tina Fey doing her best Dr. Evil impression.
Okay, so first, you can't say that it would be any cheaper and admit that the majority of the studies say it would cost a ton more, which he does in this segment. Second, John Oliver, your complaint right now is that people can't afford healthcare. Okay, now you're looking at possibly spending more for a worse product. By your own admission, you're looking at potentially spending more for crappier service. Keep in mind, too, Bernie's tax plan, this is something where he talks about, taxing the top 1%, then it moves to 5%, then it moves to 10%, depending on how many books he sells that year. His plan will tax everyone who makes $29,000 a year or more. There will be increased taxes. That's hardly someone living in the lap of luxury.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we need to be clear about this. Now, when people like Oliver, they say that universal health care would be better. This is something that really bothers me that I want to focus on, okay? They often cite studies like the World Health Organization report, okay? There are two studies that people cite when they say the United States doesn't have the best health care. We've gotten into this before. There's the Commonwealth study that has 11 countries ranked. They have the United States ranked 11th, and then the UK ranked number 1. Yeah. And then there's the it's often referred to as the WHO report that sort of lists everyone across the globe. This is often cited as well. And we've addressed it in the past, but let's start this off. We rank 37th, the United States, in the world, okay? This is, by the way, when people say we don't have the best healthcare, they are citing two studies. This one and the Commonwealth study. That's it. Okay. So we've talked about how some of them are BS because they take into account irrelevant sort of measurements, like self-reporting or personal satisfaction polls. In other words, people say, I like my healthcare. And then in previous videos, we've compared American healthcare to, say, like the UK or Canada. And we've been trying to use objective parameters, right? Things like wait time, survival rates. You can go back and search them if the search has worked. In other words, don't search them. You'll just never find them again. They don't exist. Nothingness. But then I realized that we are holding American healthcare to a much higher standard than people like Bernie Sanders or the poll takers themselves. There are all kinds of countries outside of the UK or Canada that are ranked above the United States based on the leftist criteria, the kind of criteria that Bernie would use. Not just the UK, not just the United Kingdom and Canada. So the citizens of Chile they're on month 4 right now of protests against the government because of these unbearable costs of living. What do they cite? Education, healthcare costs as some of the worst offenders.
Interesting.
Also, by the way, this should be relevant to people like Bernie. The wait times to get stents. This is a procedure, a heart procedure that Bernie had done recently when he had a heart attack. In Chile, is between 44 to 52 days.
Yeah.
It's between 44 to 52 days in the UK.
In the UK,
I want to make
yes.
sure. Yeah. I don't know what it is in Chile. I'm sure it's pretty bad too.
Yeah.
It depends on how affluent. Depends on how affluent your neighborhood there is in the UK. It's kind of like public schools. Guess what the wait time is in the United States? 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Wow. Another one on the list, Colombia. So there are 15 spaces above us, so that would be 22. I can do the math quickly, I just can't remember it. A couple of things. First off, does anyone out there really believe that, do you really believe that Colombia is better than the United States in healthcare? And you can look at, by the way, the infant mortality rate. I usually don't like using that as a comparison because why? We have a much higher standard.
Yeah.
So we actually register our infant mortality rate higher because we report them as infant mortalities, which other countries wouldn't even consider it a life. But even using a far more stringent standard, theirs is nearly double ours. Or actually, I think it's more than double ours. So that's important to note. Here's the thing, too. Most Americans, they don't want us to have healthcare like Colombia or Chile.
No.
Granted, okay? But here's the point. The standards by which Bernie and AOC and Elizabeth Warren, the standards they're using to measure a successful healthcare system, they would determine that Colombia and Chile and Cuba are undoubtedly better. It is what they would prefer. They point to a study that has them ranked 3, 4, 15 spaces above us, even though people can't get stints within that same fiscal year. Wow. Then they try to feed you the lies, this appeal to popularity fallacy, that most Americans agree with them. No,
not true.
No, that's not true. It's not true. Not that it would make it right, by the way,
No,
because
it
I'm
wouldn't
sure
matter.
at some point you could find a majority of people who agree with slavery.
Of course.
Still across the Islamic world. Indentured servitude. They build nice fake ski hills over there in Dubai. But guess what?
They do.
Slaves built that.
Oh.
You didn't build that? Slaves. So, sure, in the abstract, many Americans would like free healthcare. These are the polls they point to. They would like, hey, free healthcare, that sounds good. But most Americans want to be able to keep their insurance plan. And only 13% of Americans actually want to completely abolish private insurance, which, make no mistake, is exactly what Bernie or Warren's plan would do. By the way, please do hit the notification bell. Hit all notifications if you're subscribed on YouTube, because otherwise and turn on all the notifications on the YouTube app. Otherwise, you won't get them. Yeah. And do consider subscribing to the audio version. Of course, Mug Club is the only way we get to keep the show going, because we do not have over 100 employees, producers, writers, and researchers like John Oliver. They're taking our jobs.
We don't have the hate chili pill money, okay?
We don't.
It's just us.
It's a racket. If you want to trust big hate Peruvian pharma. Here's another one where he talks about, I think, waiting lines. Next clip.
As with cost, comparisons of wait times are very complicated. For one thing, the international wait times that you hear about most often are for non-emergency surgeries, such as knee replacements. And while, yes, people in other countries do sometimes have to wait slightly longer for some care, it's not like Americans aren't having to do that right now anyway. Americans are just sometimes forced to wait due to the expense. About half of US adults say they or a family member put off or skipped care in the past year because of the cost. And about 1 in 8 say their medical condition got worse because of that delay.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of time here to see if you can spot the bullshit, then I'll come back to it. Did you spot it? Here's the quote from John Oliver. He says, half of U.S. adults say they or a family member put off or skipped some sort of health care or dental in the past year because of cost.
Third-person information.
That could literally include my aunt skipped the cleaning because it was $85 and she didn't want to pay it that day. She needed lotto tickets. It could be you or a family member. Yeah. That's anyone in your family. And it could be some sort of health care, which seems broad enough. They're giving themselves some leeway, a backdoor out. Or dental care in the past year because of cost. Anyone you know in your family has put off some sort of health care procedure or dental care at some point in the last year. That does not mean that people are not able to get necessary medical procedures or even preventative care.
Yeah, I put off a cleaning last week because I was out of town.
Well, you always put off the cleanings, and that's an entirely other issue we'll talk about. By the way, in the UK, on the other hand, another example here, you have people going blind waiting for basic cataract surgery. On the upside, they don't have to see any Brit not named Elizabeth Hurley or Daniel Craig. So the good Lord giveth, he taketh away. But it's not how you want to base a healthcare system.
No.
Next clip.
As for the uninsured, they can wind up having to wait on a literal line seeking care with aid groups like Remote Area Medical, an organisation that travels the country setting up mobile clinics to treat people for free and which draws massive lines wherever it goes.
Having got their place in line, many camped out for the night. Before dawn, this was the moment they were waiting for.
I mean, that seems like a good thing.
Yeah.
You sort of look at it.
They're providing a service.
What is the truth here? Yeah, no, he was talking about bread lines.
Yeah,
little different
line.
This is lines for a new groundbreaking service. The truth is, these units, they were made for people in remote areas that don't really have that many medical facilities nearby. That's why they exist. People waiting outside of a free healthcare truck in a rural area without many doctors is not comparable to blind people in Manchester waiting 1.5 years to get routine cataract surgery. No. One is innovation, the other is a shitty country. Next clip.
There is the final big criticism of Medicare for All, which involves choice. Specifically, that it would take away our ability to choose the sort of health coverage that we receive. The fact is, our current system limits Americans' choices far more than it expands them. For starters, as a practical matter, most of us don't choose our health insurance. We get what we get through our employer. And because of that, choices like changing jobs can become significantly harder. And not just that. Oftentimes, your choice of doctors and hospitals is severely limited by which ones your insurance will cover.
Okay, by the way, that does not imply that you don't have a choice. It means that people choose to have the insurance through their employer because it's cheaper and it's partially subsidized by their employer.
Right.
People who do not have employer-paid health insurance get to choose whatever they want. People who do can also choose whatever they want, but they often choose to go with the employment insurance, even if it's inferior, which is the exact same example of these subjective polling parameters used for people who think that their healthcare is better because it's socialized. And by the way, while he talks about this, that it limits our choice, let's go with everything that he just says there, okay? Let's discount everything I've just said and assume everything that he said was accurate. How is that an argument for removing all choice? Okay, let's go through this here. And I do hope that the search algorithms work on YouTube because we've addressed a lot of these other arguments and we've actually shown people what it looks like to go through a socialized healthcare system. I think the most important takeaways here, though, are that World Healthcare Organization ranking and this idea that somehow this will cost less or it won't raise taxes. No, even if you watch the whole segment, go watch John Oliver's whole segment in its entirety. Please take into account the context and you will see that he undeniably contradicts himself and is advocating for a system that he admits could cost more and he admits will remove more choice. So let me get this straight. John Oliver, you admit this will raise costs. You cannot guarantee that the product will be anything better than what we currently have. All objective standards available to show that it will be worse. And you, John Oliver, admit that it will remove any remaining choices that we have from an already flawed system. And this is your best argument with over 100 writers, researchers, and producers? You are just the worst. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this clip. If you don't, these are the ABCs of me, baby. You can just click next video and put it in double speed. Of course, search doesn't necessarily work. Subscriptions, notifications don't necessarily work. Just bookmark this page, check in. We do a new video every single day, except for Sunday. And if you don't want this content to disappear, join Mug Club at louderwithcredit.com/mugclub. It's only $69 if you're a student, veteran, or active military. And if you don't, listen, I don't want to say that you're hellbound, but it doesn't look good for you.